Welcome back to the Digital Catholic Social Teaching series, sponsored by my good friend, Ukrain-Russia. And today we have a remarkable guest, Victor Gaetan, who I have only known now for a short time. Every time we get to talk, I learn an enormous amount. And so today will be a guest speaker equipped with his own fire hose. Let me briefly put this in a little context. What has been happening to all of us has, in fact, a quite remarkable character. The result of digital technology, therefore digital Catholic social teaching, is that we no longer live in the modern world. I've not emphasized that point probably enough in this series. It was the statement I opened and closed each of the 8 sessions of the previous course on 3 spheres, East, West, and digital. So if we are no longer living in the modern world, then who amongst us might be able to give us some important hints about how we should proceed? And of course, the answer to that question is the quintessential organization, institution of the Roman Catholic Church and its interactions with the rest of the world. And so what Victor is about to tell us from an inside point of view, Victor is a very well-known, talented, awarded journalist, but he has written the remarkable book, which we will talk about today, God's Diplomats. And so I will be disappointed with you all if you don't go to Amazon and buy a copy after the end of this, and then come back and add to the long list of 5-star reviews. Victor, I don't think I've ever seen a book with so many positive reviews to it. So let me hand this over to Victor now. Thank you very much for coming to help.
Yes. Thank you very much for this invitation, Mark, and hello to everybody. Also, I want to thank Shirkant for helping with the technical aspects. My observations on Vatican diplomacy are drawn from research I did for a book published last year, God's Diplomats, Pope Francis, Vatican Diplomacy, and America's Armageddon. The rotating image reminds me of a wonderful analogy Pope Francis uses in his critique of globalization. He says globalization must respect local culture, not erase difference. Francis thinks technology and globalization make individuals too much the same. His vision of a peaceful world can be pictured, quote unquote, not as a sphere, but a polyhedron. Each culture retains its unique characteristics while in dialogue, says Francis. What is the most common shape that matches Francis's vision? He says a soccer ball, such a common and universal object. By the way, soccer is happens to be a very popular sport in Latin America, in Europe, in Africa, and in Asia. To summarize the Vatican diplomat tradition, I find these words: ancient, adaptable, and adept. Let's start with ancient. 3,300 years ago, anthropologists find the practice of diplomacy between rulers in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Assyria. So Rome did not invent diplomacy. However, in Western civilization, the roots of diplomacy are found in the 4th century, when Pope Sylvester sent 2 priests to represent him at the Council of Nicaea in the 300s. The council was convened by the emperor based in Constantinople. For hundreds of years, popes sent ambassadors to the Byzantine court to keep tabs on what was happening, report back, and to translate documents from Greek to Latin. 7 of these long-term envoys from Rome to Constantinople became popes, including Gregory the Great. Next slide, please. Here I'm highlighting Pope Gregory the Great, mainly because he was an exemplary medieval pope. Among Catholic intellectuals, the medieval period is admired for its unitary worldview, a time when transcendence permeated everything people did. Gregory led the Catholic Church from 590 to 604, after serving as an envoy to Constantinople for 6 years. In his 13 years as head of the Catholic Church, Gregory had global impact and influence down to this day. Gregory formalized liturgy and sacred music. For example, the Gregorian chant is named for him. He was the first pope who was a monk. Son of a Roman senator, he turned most of his family estate into a monastery. Also, he helped establish monastic rules. He was a missionary. He sent 40 monks to Eastern Britain to evangelize, which was the first large-scale mission assignment from Rome. Gregory is a saint in the Anglican Church as well as in the Eastern Orthodox and Latin Catholic Church. During his papacy, we find the church taking over civil governance function. As Gregory negotiates with invading Lombards and organizes systematic relief for the poor during famine. Gregory was a prolific author also. He wrote instructions for bishops on leading a holy life that became a manual throughout the Middle Ages. It emphasized humility and self-discipline. His ideas are echoed in contemporary thinking. For example, Jesuit philosopher Romano Guardini's The End of the Modern World, written in 1956. Guardini, by the way, is a favorite author of both Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, who started a PhD thesis on Guardini's work without finishing it. Like Gregory, Guardini concludes that quote unquote decisive characteristics for our time is humility. He sees it as the most authentic response to the obsession of power found in contemporary society. But let's return to the central focus of this talk. The modern interstate system of diplomacy has its roots in the network of envoys and ambassadors deployed by the Vatican in the late Middle Ages. As the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was a political, a judicial, and a spiritual authority rolled into one. Throughout the centuries, Rome developed a diplomatic system to serve the requirements of governing Christendom. The society
Victor, let me interrupt you just for a second. I'm having a problem, technical problem. Just hold on for a second. I'm going to stop sharing and start sharing again. Just a second. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yes. All right. I was saying that throughout the centuries, Rome developed a diplomatic system to serve the requirements of governing Christendom, the society of medieval Europe with shared religious and cultural norms. All this was united by belief in God. These diplomatic tools were especially aimed at preserving unity, rather. Next slide, please. A second word I use to describe Vatican diplomacy is adaptable. Although the Pope is the last absolute monarch in Europe, it's not accurate to see the Catholic Church's structure as a fixed pyramid with the Pope sitting on the top, especially when we look at how the Church solves diplomatic problems. Its true power comes from a network of relationships. The front line for Vatican diplomacy, it's ambassadors called nuncios, from the Latin word for messenger. They are appointed to represent the Pope in 183 countries. Some nuncios cover several countries at once. Most nuncios are trained at the Vatican's diplomatic school in Rome, called the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy, founded in 1701. It is the oldest school of diplomacy. All nuncios are priests. In the country where they are assigned, they have two main jobs: to interact with the host government and to be the Pope's eyes and ears on the country's bishops. Through those bishops, nuncios are connected to Catholic parishes, to schools, and to charitable groups. These networks run laterally across countries and vertically from remote locations where you might find religious sisters and monks up to Rome. What the nuncios learn is truly local knowledge about every country. All that information and insight is fed up to the Pope through his Secretariat of State, a kind of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As a French diplomat told me, nuncios are respected because they are often right. Vatican diplomats are powerful analysts, the Frenchman told me. Here's just one example. All the misery that flowed from the US invasion of Iraq was anticipated by the Holy See. Not even one intelligence service saw that so clearly, he told me. The Pope's right-hand man for foreign policy is the Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who served in this role since 2013. That is the entire Francis papacy. The Pope's foreign policy decisions are implemented through the Secretariat of State. Other offices in the Roman Curia help implement the decisions made by the Pope. Taken together, the Catholic Church's government is known as the Holy See. Vatican City is the tiny territory defined by the 1929 Lateran Treaty signed with the Italian government. Simply put, the Holy See is the power and the Vatican City is the place. In time, as the number of religious men and women has declined, Catholic lay organizations have grown. These are typically transnational, anywhere from Opus Dei to Pax Christi International, to the Sant'Egidio community, to the Focolare movement. These lay organizations have often taken on diplomatic roles once reserved for missionary religious orders. Let me tell you a recent story from Zimbabwe. In 2017, President Robert Mugabe, a Catholic, provoked a national crisis when at the age of 93, he tried to install his unpopular second wife, 41 years younger, as his successor. As a result, the military put the president in house arrest by surrounding the palace and turned to a Jesuit priest to negotiate with the president to avert the civil war. A week later, Mugabe stepped down and his vice president, who had fled the country, took office. The priest's intuitive diplomatic skill was the crucial factor in a peaceful transfer of power that also allowed Mugabe to retain his dignity. Father Mukonari, a Jesuit, the negotiator, sought what Catholic doctrine calls the common good for all. In his words, he said, "I look for what I believe is just for individuals and the nation of Zimbabwe," unquote. This notion of the common good animates much of Vatican diplomacy. And this story shows how the skills of a pastor are close to the skills of a diplomat, meaning the church has more people available to play a diplomatic role than just the nuncios. Next slide, please. What is a bit complicated is why the Catholic Church is the only world religion considered sovereign and is respected as a country with what's called international personality under international law. Sovereignty contributes profoundly to Rome's international clout. Because of its sovereign status, the Holy See is a permanent observer in the United Nations, participating in meetings and debates, although not a voting member, by its own choice. Four main factors explain the Holy See status. First, as we reviewed, historically, the Catholic Church helped create the system of international diplomatic relations in the late Middle Ages. So it was thoroughly integrated and assimilated into the modern interstate system that emerged in the 17th century following the Peace of Westphalia. Even when the unification of Italy caused the Church to lose the Papal States in 1870, other countries continued to recognize the Church and seek its help in different matters. Thirdly, there is a wide perception in the international community that the Holy See makes valuable and unique contributions. For instance, during World War I, the Vatican set up a postal system so families could communicate with sick soldiers and POWs. Furthermore, the Vatican managed to transport soldiers with TB to Switzerland, a neutral country, so they could get care. Fourthly, in the 1929 Lateran Treaty between Italy and the Holy See created Vatican City to give the Church a small territory to really secure its independence. The treaty grants sovereignty as inherent to the Church's identity and mission. The Church was right to insist on this bit of territory. For instance, when the Nazis rode tanks into Rome, they stopped at the borders of Vatican City because it was neutral and sovereign. At the time when thousands of Jews and POWs, American and Brits, were hidden in religious buildings there, protected by this independence. However, foreign ambassadors sent to this tiny country are representatives to the Holy See, not to Vatican City. As UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, for instance, said in the 1960s, when I request an audience from the Vatican, I do not go to see the King of Vatican City, but the head of the Catholic Church. Next slide, please. We're going to spend some time on this slide because it's so important. The Catholic diplomatic tradition does not have one school or stock theory. Instead, 5 fundamental sources guide Vatican diplomats. Diplomacy is encoded in sacred scripture. First, in Christ's specific attention to nations. The risen Lord directs his 11 remaining apostles to, quote, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, unquote. More important than just introducing public diplomacy is an important activity for Christians. The Gospels give tips to mediators and peacemakers. One of the most moving diplomatic moments is when Christ stops a gang from stoning an adulterous woman. How does he defend her? By shifting the mob's attention from the woman to the ground, where Christ begins to draw. By this gesture, Christ forces a pause in the conflict. He redirects attention to a larger question of justice and changes the dynamic by stepping into it. Thus, a passionate clash over passion is diffused. That is diplomacy in a nutshell, not just an ontology of moral positions. The Bible provides tactics and constructive analogies. Another source is natural law. The beauty of natural law for Vatican diplomacy is its status as Catholic and universal at the same time. Natural was developed in greatest detail by St. Thomas Aquinas following Aristotle. It provides an account of morality and of state obligations applicable to all cultures, to all people, and to all nations. According to St. Thomas, God created the world animated by an eternal law, not entirely knowable to human beings. God imprinted men and women with reason and ability to discern right from wrong. It is a moral compass written in their hearts that flows from eternal law. Regardless of when people live or under what political regime, they know that being truthful, seeking God, and creating families are all rational goods. They know that killing, lying, and adultery are not. These are all examples of natural law. Another source for Vatican diplomacy is Catholic social thought. The range of social issues considered legitimate for Vatican diplomats to worry about expanded under Pope Leo XIII, 1878 to 1903. Responding to workplace inequality and radical reforms proposed by the emerging Marxist ideology, Pope Leo XIII released Rerum Novarum, in translation, One of New Things, in 1891, outlining the church's vision of employment in the workplace. The document is a key text evoked by every pope since. The church's work on behalf of justice and peace is aimed at protecting and promoting human dignity. The individual also has God-given rights, says Rerum Novarum, to education, to sufficient food, to healthcare, to security, to religious freedom, and to the fruits of his or her labor. If wealth is in the hands of a few, workers are reduced to slavery. At the same time, workers must respect the property of the owners, we are told by Leo XIII. Another key element of Catholic thought is that human beings are social. Nothing should interfere with the families, with faith communities, or with associations that people can create. Private possessions, including property, allow individuals and their families to plan for their future and pass on inheritance. Rerum Novarum describes private property as preceding the existence of state. So the state generally has no right to deprive people of property. That would be theft, violating God's commandments. Another source of Vatican diplomacy is the magisterium, the church's teaching tradition, that is. This tradition stretches back for centuries, but I will highlight one key document. The papal text, the Vatican II era, most important to diplomacy, is Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, 1963. The encyclical that Jesuit scholar Father Drew Christensen, a friend who passed away last week, called it the linchpin of modern Vatican diplomacy. Pacem in Terris was the direct product of a little-known diplomatic encounter. Pope John XXIII would not have written it if he had not played a discrete major role in the Cuban Missile Crisis the year before. Pacem in Terris is addressed not just to Catholic priests and faithful, but to quote, unquote, men of goodwill. It situates human rights in natural law, which states are obligated to respect. The last source of Vatican diplomats is the classic diplomatic texts. I will highlight here three major works. First, a treatise on ambassadors written in 1436 by Bernard du Rossier, a papal envoy to Spain, who later became the Archbishop of Toulouse in France. Rossier explained that for diplomacy to be truly divine, to be God's work, it should advance the common good, which requires peace. Second, There was perhaps no more famous practitioner of diplomacy in his day than Cardinal Richelieu, whose wisdom was captured in the Testament Politique compiled and circulated after his death. But the book that really popularized Richelieu's ideas was on the manner of negotiating with princes by François de Calier, published in 1716. Not only was it the go-to text in the 18th century regarding ideal conduct and methods, but its influence was revived in the 20th century when scholars such as Ernest Satow quoted extensively in his seminar, A Guide to Diplomatic Practice. What's especially eye-catching is to find in Callier's 300-year-old book, Pope Francis's ideas. Collier valorizes empathy, the ability to see problems from the other's perspective. So does Francis. Collier describes negotiation as seeking to harmonize the interests of both sovereigns. Francis refers to harmonizing diversity as an appropriate goal for achieving agreement or peace without imposing a false unity. Both Collier and Francis share an attitude toward time and the value of patience. Trust is established gradually, says Francis, so decisions should not be forced. In light of this reality, it is best to set out step by step to achieve concrete tasks rather than giant goals. Even Collier's modest definition of what the endeavor is all about finds resonance with Francis's practice. Diplomacy is the attempt to find a basis of common action or agreement, says Francis. The book on the manner of negotiating with princes distills the elements of French diplomacy originated by Richelieu and practiced across Europe from 1648 until about World War I. These sources of inspiration and motivation make peace the raison d'être of God's diplomacy. Next slide, please. To recap, the national law tradition, which rests strongly on Aristotle, assumes the ability of the church to protect the good of all, believers and non-believers. This is fundamental to Vatican diplomacy. And the overall goals of Vatican diplomacy are peace, considered unachievable without justice, human dignity, and freedom. Let's keep in mind that the Catholic definition of freedom differs from the popular understanding of freedom. According to the Catholic Catechism, human freedom is a force for growth and maturity in truth and goodness. It attains its perfection when directed toward God. The more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. There is no true freedom except in the service of what is good and just. The choice to disobey and do evil is an abuse of freedom, therefore. Freedom is linked to self-discipline, virtue, and the pursuit of truth and goodness. Next slide, please. So far, we have reviewed fundamental principles such as common good and human dignity. Let's add three more core ideas relevant to Vatican diplomacy. First, political authority as a moral force. Most know the famous injunction from Jesus Christ, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God, which is a short description of the Christian's relation to the state. The individual is obligated to respect and conform to legitimate civil authority, yet political order has obligations too. For one thing, as St. Thomas declares, quote, the chief concern of the ruler is to procure the unity of peace, unquote. Political regimes, therefore, must be held accountable to a higher law. According to the Catholic Catechism, political authority must guarantee a well-ordered community without reducing individual freedom. It should be guided by moral law, which is transcendent, universal, absolute, and equally binding on all, with its source in God. The state, therefore, is obligated to enforce just laws that correspond to the dignity of the human being. The state should serve as a neutral arbiter, reconciling the interests of social groups, correcting injustice, and providing for the least among us. Its main responsibility is to promote the common good. Next slide, please. Solidarity and subsidiarity. Human beings are social. Nothing should interfere with the families, faith communities, or workplace cooperatives, for example, that people create. The solidarity of people living and working together is an essential meaning-producing activity that is also at the heart of worship. The Catholic Church developed the related principle of subsidiarity for the idea that activities should be done by the smallest, most decentralized unit possible, as opposed to large, complex organizations. Subsidiarity is a principle supported local decision-making, limited government, and personal freedom. The term was first used in Pope Pius XI's encyclical on reconstruction of the social order in 1931. John XXIII updated the application of subsidiarity in Pacem in Terris, explaining that although an entity such as the United Nations is necessary to help solve some universal problems, it should not take responsibility away from an individual state or limit its sphere of activity. God's hand guiding history. Catholic theology sees God working through history. The Supreme Being did not create the world and step away. That would be theism's watchmaker God. A diplomat can advise God's plan, and he must do his best to discern God's will. But human limits prevent him from comprehending his infinite scope. So the inability to control outcomes is a fact of life. As Pope Francis puts it, a Christian is obligated to start processes, including dialogue, allowing the Holy Spirit to step in. But no human can control this process and should not even try to. Next slide, please. Pope Francis's principles. In Pope Francis' first papal exhortation in 2013, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of gospel, Francis emphasized 4 principles. First, that the whole is greater than the parts. Second, that unity prevails over conflict. Thirdly, that realities are more important than ideas, and that time is greater than space. Although abstract at first glance, these rules summarize his strategy and reflect his desire to remain neutral among competing geopolitical powers, including the United States. This neutrality in turn helps restore the Holy See to its status as a major diplomatic player. I want to use these principles to dissect Francis's attitude toward the Ukraine-Russia conflict until the Russian invasion last month. Francis's first guiding principle, that the whole is greater than the parts, can be seen in his reluctance to take side. Catholics make up no more than 10% of Ukraine's population, but they have long played an outsized role shaping national identity. The largest Catholic community is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, created in 1596, when This part of today's Ukraine was part of Austro-Hungary Empire when a group of Orthodox bishops agreed to recognize Rome while maintaining Byzantine Rite liturgy. Ukraine also has a smaller Latin and Ruthenian Catholic community, a legacy as well from a Western Ukraine's history as Polish and Austro-Hungarian territory. The Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine has firmly attached itself to the pro-Western side of Ukraine's internal conflict. One might have expected Francis to do so as well. In Buenos Aires, for instance, he was friendly with the present Archbishop of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine. In 2015, the Pope, on the contrary, politely told his Ukrainian bishops to stay out of politics, explaining, quote, the sense of justice and truth before being political is moral, unquote. For Francis, all conflict can be traced to interests, whether military, economic, or those related to national pride. He therefore refuses to prioritize one group of Christians over another. Francis's second principle emphasizes unity over conflict. The unity he means to preserve is not only among fellow Catholics, but also between Catholics and their Orthodox brothers and sisters. He called the war fratricidal. More recently, he has also called it infantile and barbaric. The third of Francis's principles is that realities are more important than ideas. Living through Argentina's dirty war, Bergoglio despises ideology. Applying this attitude to Ukraine, he prioritized humanitarian assistance. For example, between 2016 and 2018, he raised 18 million euros for some 900,000 Ukrainians, most of them Orthodox, who either resided in a conflict zone or had been displaced from their homes. This is greater than space. Time is greater than space, is the fourth principle shaping the Holy See's diplomacy. In the Pope's view, politics is preoccupied with taking positions, gaining advantage, and occupying space in a manner that mimics military action. Francis prefers to advance slowly through personal encounters that gradually build love and mutual respect. Next slide, please. With the rest of the world, Pope Francis is horrified by the barbarity of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Historically, popes have served as mediators between powers nearing conflict. Now, we are thinking of the Chile versus Argentina conflict in 1978 to 1984, or the most recent example, the 2014 Cuba-US agreement, when both sides requested Vatican assistance. In recent decades, Catholic humanitarian organizations have also mediated active conflict situations, such as San Egidio in Mozambique, 1990 to 1992, and Pax Christi Netherlands facilitated negotiations, peace settlements in Colombia more recently. In the current Russian war, I don't imagine a scenario in which Pope Francis is mediating between the two states, or not yet. A possible constructive role is one in which the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, both with powerful constituencies in their respective areas, engaged with each other publicly in Syria, for instance. Behind the scenes, the Vatican is also active on immediate solutions, including providing support for citizens under assault and humanitarian corridors to get people out and supplies in. The Church's network of charitable organizations, especially Caritas International, active in Ukraine and in every neighboring country, is one of the most active entities besides the United Nations and the Red Cross. As the map shows, there was a profound divide between Russophiles and Russophobes in Ukraine until the invasion, although the war has clearly strengthened Ukrainian identity. At the same time, there has not been a profound cultural division between Orthodox and Catholics in Ukraine. Last summer, I interviewed the Ukrainian Catholic Archbishop overseeing Crimea from his location in Odessa. For example, he said churches are opened, worship continued, and his priests in Crimea have no particular problems. A meaningful religious element in this war is clearly the Orthodox split in 2018 in Ukraine. Many people in Ukraine and Russia saw the hand of the United States behind ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew's recognition of an autocephalous or independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church during the presidential campaign of Petro Poroshenko. Then there was pressure on the Orthodox parishes aligned with Moscow Patriarchy in Ukraine to leave that long-time historic and canonical affiliation to join this new entity. Normally, it takes decades, if not centuries, to establish an Orthodox Church as autocephalous or independent. I'm afraid the Russian Orthodox Church saw that move as a declaration of war, as did the Russian state. Final slide. Let's turn to humility. Here I would go to South Sudan for the South Sudan example. Pope Francis first met South Sudan's President Salva Kiir in Uganda while on Francis's first trip to Africa in 2015. Salva Kiir, a Catholic, has served as president since South Sudan's independence in 2018. And 11, I'm sorry. Tragically, the country fell into a brutal civil war where soldiers allied with the president, who is a member of the Dinka community, began fighting with soldiers allied with first vice president Riek Machar from the Nuer community, the second biggest ethnic group after the Dinka. The civil war created one of the biggest humanitarian disasters, with millions of people displaced, about 500,000 people killed, and the destruction of an economy gifted with oil and gold. By 2019, major powers had basically given up on South Sudan's leadership. Pope Francis, together with Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and the former Presbyterian leader from Scotland, brought the entire South Sudanese leadership together to the Vatican. In fact, to the guest house where Francis lives. The president and 4 vice presidents of South Sudan, including Machar, participated in a spiritual retreat. The result was a new governing coalition in February of 2020, bringing together both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, which has lasted to this day. At the time, a US envoy told the Washington Post it would literally take a miracle from God for Riek and Salva to ever be part of the solution here. The US government even put sanctions on several South Sudanese leaders. What the diplomacy of Pope Francis gave these leaders was a spiritual interlude to meet each other, recognize each other's humanity, pledge diligence towards peace, and commit to a shared goal with no sacrifice to personal honor or identity, which catalyzed a change of heart. It was a priceless gift and a diplomatic coup. During that event, Pope Francis kissed the feet of each leader in a really stunning example of humility, thinking of the echo that with Jesus washing the feet of his disciples the night he was crucified. The gesture also sent these leaders off with an assignment: serve your people. Ultimately, diplomacy is service to peace. Thank you.
Victor, this has been absolutely stunning. I don't believe there's anybody else with your experience or who could bring together such a compelling presentation. Let me remind everybody here, this is a session on the third leg of Catholic social teaching, which is to say solidarity. So in a world which has now fragmented, the notion of one world or globalization has very broadly now been discarded. I'll draw your attention to an opinion piece by David Brooks on Friday in the New York Times. Globalization is over. So if that version of solidarity has in fact been pushed aside, if we are not to then fall into a massive series of conflicts around the world, and the sense that I'm getting from those I'm talking to is that this is already underway, that there are collapses ahead in various places and various confrontations, as Ukraine will probably leave the front pages in a few months. Others will replace that. So where are the peacemakers? Which was the title of my review of Victor's book, you can find on Amazon. The answers are in Victor's presentation. This is where the peacemakers reside. They have never been more needed. And Victor, I want to thank you very much. You've done a remarkable job in exposing this group of people and many others through your book to this absolutely essential phenomenon, peace on earth, pacem in terris. I will be the first one to ask a question, if you don't mind, Shrikant.
Please.
And you can throw it on the pile and decide how you wish to sequence these. Of
Let
course.
me let me do one thing.
Yeah.
Before you ask the question, I'm going to encourage other people to line up for questions.
Right.
You can go ahead and ask 1, 2, 3 questions, whatever you prefer, Mark, and then we will go to everybody else's questions. Go ahead and folks, if you would like to ask questions, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Mark, go ahead.
In the subtitle for your book, you discuss and in some respects detail, but perhaps not as much as I would like to hear from you, America's Armageddon. The situation that we are now living in is a quite extraordinary one. I had an opportunity this morning. My neighbor, who I've brought up a couple of times before in these sessions, happens to work for a large financial institution. He got his training at Cornell and Princeton, but he's a Russian Jew from Moscow. And he is very much caught in the middle of this. And the notion that the United States is now being viewed around the world as a second-rate power, not as the world leading power. I'm picking up from my correspondents in Delhi, in Tokyo, in the Middle East, that the downgrading of America, which has literally had no coherent strategy for 30 years now to deal with these sorts of issues, has built up to the point where we are, in fact, facing a kind of an Armageddon. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that problem that America has. Thank you.
Right. Thank you again, everybody, for inviting me. I hope I came out as clearly as possible. Yes, Mark. This observation that is almost unanimous from all types of figures, common people, experts, economic experts, diplomats, is that the United States has moved to strictly military solutions. And instead of stepping into calm nerves, the United States is giving reports after reports of how much more weapons are being shipped and going to be shipped, not only to Ukraine to defend itself, but to all other type of countries, European countries, NATO countries, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, billions and billions every so few months. So instead of stepping into calm nerves, the United States role, it became as a very important American military told me recently, the raison d'etre of the United States is weaponizing the world and generating or facilitating more conflict.
Thank you, Victor. So folks, now it's time for your questions. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to ask questions. Try to keep your questions concise so we can get to as many questions and as many answers as we possibly can. I'm going to collect all the questions and then we're going to go through them one by one. First up is Bruce. Bruce, what's your question?
In 2022, how many priests are in church diplomatic training? Which countries are they in? And how does the church promote this training?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Next up is Max. Max, go ahead.
Thank you. So in the past, at least from the overview that I have of history, the Pope used almost explicitly religious methods of enacting policy on certain countries via excommunication, either of the kings or of the people in the armies if they acted in certain parts. But that doesn't seem to happen as much anymore. Why is that?
Okay, very good. I'm going to add one more of my questions to it. My question is, what distinguishes the Vatican's ability to negotiate as compared to all other bodies? You know, not just countries, but various bodies like United Nations and stuff. What is it that distinguishes the Vatican's ability to negotiate? So let's start with Bruce's question, then my question, and then Max, or you can keep adding questions and I will incorporate them. So first question is, what is the size of the diplomacy of the church? How many priests? Where are they? What do they do?
Yes, the diplomatic corps of the Vatican is rather small. There are about 300 Vatican diplomats around the world, and this tiny skilled group at the Vatican that centralizes and are the recipients of the information coming from around the world. In addition to this, what is very important is the large networks of priests in every country, of religious orders, monks and nuns of different religious orders, of lay people who communicate to the respective nuncio in to the respective capital, which in turn passes on the information vertically to the Secretariat of State. Now, these are there are the diplomats, but then there are different congregations that themselves are local. They have local representatives, priests and nuns and monks and so on, who themselves acquire local. Again, local is the quintessential aspect, that the information comes from local, from faraway places, not inhabited by many people, and so the
looks like there is an internet problem.
the network is 183 countries.
Could you repeat your last
that-
couple of sentences, Victor?
The Vatican has diplomatic group at the Vatican. Hello.
Victor, can you, there was an internet problem from your side. Could you repeat your last 2 or 3 sentences?
Yes, I was saying that the network of diplomats is rather small, the smallest of all governments that have diplomats around the world. In Washington, D.C., for instance, the United States is considered probably the most important capital on the planet. The network of Vatican diplomats is very small. There is 1 nuncio and 3 Vatican diplomats. They receive some sporadic help from a number of nuns and a number of priests, sporadic work again. So and this makes the work that is performed by the Vatican diplomats, they must work continuously. They also have, one would say, the advantage of not having families that would take so much time and emotion away from their day and night work. There was another question, I believe, separate.
Yes, I will. Yeah, we'll come to other questions. Peter, go ahead and ask your question.
I'm on an airplane, so I asked it.
Okay. I'll ask it for you. What diplomatic strategies has Church developed since 1700 to deal with the new dimension of conflict introduced by the electric speed, that is radio, telegraph, television, where news reaches everyone at once? So let's take that question. Go ahead, Victor.
Right. The most important attribute that the Vatican has is neutrality. And neutrality because it has no material interests. The Holy See doesn't have an economy, doesn't have military interests or an army, and doesn't have territorial claims with no one. In addition, the Vatican is respected, and it is followed and asked for opinions in all types of circumstances, in all United Nations body where the Vatican is present, and at the nuclear denuclearization conferences and so far. I don't know if I answered your question.
Let me put it another way. So basically what has happened with the modern technology, the news moves very fast. All the information moves very fast. How is Vatican adjusting to that?
The history of the Vatican stepping into the modern world begins with the postal office during the First World War. The Vatican was the first institution to establish, to put together a postal office, which facilitated correspondence between the families of the prisoners of war from all sides, and the telegraph that followed, and therefore the Vatican entered the international institutions of post and telegraph and so on. What gives the Vatican the essential role as a sovereign state and as a territorial independence is the Lateran Treaty signed with the Italian government in 1929. And by signing this treaty, which gives recognizes the Vatican as a territory, that small land called Vatican City, it adds to the independence and to the territorial independence, which we then see as a fascinating positive role that act played when Rome was taken over by the Nazi armies, and to the borders of the Vatican City, where the Germans respected that territorial integrity. But the question I believe that is really asked is up to the present technological developments, how active is the Vatican in this new era of artificial intelligence and so on. I would defer on this question to Mark. I believe Mark is in the best position to address this particular question.
Sounds good. We'll Mark, would you like to comment now, or would you?
Just very briefly.
Yeah.
A fascinating article appeared in the Financial Times this past week about a monk who is outside of the Vatican structures, remembering here, and this is probably important to note more broadly, for those who have seen the movie Two Popes, for instance, and have noticed that the retirement of Benedict XVI was highly unusual. And in fact, in my view, the first Pope who has ever done that. There are some other examples, but I think they have different circumstances. This Pope is the sort of guy who put himself through chemical engineering school in Buenos Aires by serving as a bouncer in Buenos Aires port bars. Now, as you may very well imagine, you cannot do that without a loaded pistol in your waistband. You don't bring a knife to a Buenos Aires bar for a fight. So this is a tough guy. And he has been radically shifting responsibilities and promoting and demoting both. And so this article indicated that he has a special guide on the topic of artificial intelligence. I am looking forward, hopefully someday, to be able to meet that man. I think that I should also point you to, in 2015, so now 7 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated a very famous encyclical, Laudato Si. And Laudato Si, like most encyclicals, probably had some committees helping to work on various chapters. But I will draw your attention to chapter 3 of Laudato Si, beginning with paragraph 101. It's all online, easy to get to, in which he effectively presents a condensed version of that unfinished PhD on Romano Guardini, and in particular quotes him quite extensively. So my answer here is that this particular Pope has the sensibility to try to sort these questions out, and has gone around the bureaucracy, the curial bureaucracy, to accomplish that. Although, I will also note and finish with this, it turns out that if an important person in all of this is the Ghanan Cardinal Turkson. Turkson had the assignment for 5 years to run one of the most important organizations to Francis, the Dicastery for Integral Human Development. He has now stepped down and was appointed just this past week to run the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. We, CSDL, will be in Rome in 7 weeks. And it is my hope that I will be able to then come back and report firsthand to you better about how the Vatican is stepping up to this fundamental problem, which I'll describe it in the following simple way. The robots are coming. And they're not just coming, but they're replacing human beings. So the real topic becomes what happens to the dignity of human labor, taking us all the way back to Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum. What happens to that when as much as 50% of today's occupations are replaced by machines? This will become a serious problem for which the Vatican does not currently have, as best I can tell, any public response. We're hoping to be engaged with the Holy See on exactly that matter.
Wonderful. Next, I want to take a question from Max. How is Vatican handling diplomacy with China?
Yes, a very tough question. The Vatican has been engaged with China, both churches, what is called the official church and the underground church, since 1980. As soon as Pope John Paul II came to take office, one of the first things he wanted to know was the state of the Catholic Church, the official Catholic Church in Ukraine, in China. And he was briefed on those matters by missionaries who continue to go back and forth. From one particular missionary I interviewed at length from Belgium, and another missionary priest from the United States, from the Maryknoll order, and then others. And the questions that John Paul II kept repeating he wanted to know was, we know about the underground church. We don't know anything about the official church. So engage with the official representatives of the Catholic Church and with the Chinese government. And this went on for some 20 years. When Benedict XVI continued the work that was undertaken by John Paul II, and he came, Benedict XVI, in 2007 to issue a letter whereby he took away the privileges, what were called the privileges that the Vatican granted what was called underground church, and asked them to pay attention to the then initiative of the Vatican. So the work by 2010 was interrupted in the negotiations between the Vatican emissaries and the Chinese authorities, and it's taken immediately as Pope Francis steps in. He brings back the diplomats that worked under John Paul II and Benedict XVI, and relaunches the negotiations, which led to the 2018 provisional agreement between the Vatican and the Chinese government, which was renewed in 2020 and it's to be either renewed this year, sometime in October of this year, or it would be just forgotten about it. The chances that it would be renewed seem to be higher than the ones that that would define it as a failure. Why do I believe that the agreement will be either renewed or declared permanent? And we'll learn more, because at this point it has been non-disclosed. Since the 2020 renewal, there have been 5 bishops that have been recognized by both the Chinese government and by the Vatican. And more bishops seem to be in workings to be recognized by both the Chinese government and the Vatican. So the situation is still a work in progress, one way or another. What I find most interesting, though, is that the spread of the Catholic communities in China. It's not that important how many there are, which is the typical question. How many Catholics are there in China? We believe maybe 12 million, but they are spread throughout China, and there are well-recognized and well-founded and very active dioceses and archdioceses and prefectures, and this is what I believe is very important, that they are spread throughout China. Now, the restrictions have increased on the Catholic communities since in the past few years in particular. Children are not allowed to go to church. And there are no catechisms that would be officially allowed. On the contrary, they are prohibited. So this back and forth between the restrictions and some type of a loosening has been going on, especially since the early 80s, and increase the restrictions have gotten tougher. It's not clear how the diplomats of the Vatican will be navigating these increasing restrictions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Now, the title, the subject for these last 2 sessions is solidarity. So I want to come back to that topic. So first, I want to ask Victor, and the same question to Mark. What is the role? What is the place? What does solidarity mean in the Catholic social teaching? And what is its role in Catholic social teaching?
Right. Well, solidarity is solidarity in the rudimentary approach with the needy, the oppressed, those who need social and medical and help and solidarity at large. And then there is solidarity around the same ideals, in the Bible, in the sacraments, in the biblical teachings, and it is solidarity at large. It is a term that has been vulgarized since the Marxist ideology that turned the term solidarity into a fighting, the struggle among the classes, the social, fight. But solidarity is it stems from Aristotle, and then it goes through. It is finessed by Thomas Aquinas, and then picked up in Rerum Novarum and developed and brought to pretty much to date in the Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. This is basically solidarity.
Thank you, Mark.
Of course, Mark would have a more philosophical.
Well, my answer is a simple one. Solidarity means our common belonging to the human race. It is just that simple. And this commonality, which obviously presents to us obligations to make sure that justice is served, that virtues are employed in our governments, making sure that the poor and the disadvantaged are given preferences. This takes on a very different character when we are in a world where artificial humans are being generated at a very aggressive pace. It turns out that those same forces that are using the United States as this arming of the world, as Victor has correctly laid out here, these military and we can go back to Eisenhower's concerns about a military industrial complex. Today, the military industrial complex wants to get rid of human beings. There isn't a military in the world that doesn't want robots to be fighting their wars, not humans. The whole drone phenomenon obviously is a significant expression of this. Much of this technology is actually now being tested out in Ukraine. And so the solidarity of human beings with each other in a world which will be rapidly populated by a vast array of non-human intelligent androids who will be asking for rights. Robot rights is already a rising topic. So this subject, what happens to Catholic social teaching, human dignity, subsidiarity, and solidarity under digital conditions, by which I do not mean Facebook, by which I do not mean these digits, by which I mean a world that will be radically transformed. This has already begun. This is a process that cannot be stopped. The military and large corporations want robots, not humans. So solidarity amongst humans under digital conditions, regardless of our apparent differences, regardless of the fact that we may all belong to one or another facet of this polyhedral globalism, will become a huge priority. This will be the topic of next week's session.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Mark, do you have any more questions for Victor or any more general comments to wrap up? And go ahead.
I just want everyone here to recognize how radically new something as old as Vatican diplomacy truly is. This is what the Center for the Study of Digital Life, who is behind this series, has referred to as digital retrieving the medieval. The sensibility of a world that has a commonality as humans has been lost. Modern psychology, quite deliberately, patterns human beings on computers. If human beings are patterned on computers, then that is the very important step towards replacing human beings with computers. This is a responsibility that we all have. The Chinese, the Europeans, the West, and the rest are going to have to step up to this. Victor has given us a remarkable foundation for thinking about this. And we will continue next week with some of the implications which will need to be taken far more seriously, I'm afraid, than they are today.
Folks, I have put the link for Victor's book on Amazon. So please click on it before we close the meetup, so that way you can get it. And all right, so thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next time. Victor, this was wonderful. It's a world that most people are not aware of, and it's a crucial part of our world. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to learning more from your extraordinary sessions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.